Greetings and welcome to episode 44 of the Sustaining the Herd podcast, brought to you by Agri-Services and Engineering of Raymond, Nebraska. I'm Andrew Wadle, and normally I'm joined in the studio with my co-host Brock Vitek, and Brock is on assignment today at the Balance Forward Conference in Omaha, Nebraska. That's the Balance Forward Sustainability Conference, and he'll be back with us for our next recording, and he'll be bringing back lots of information that he learned there. But our special guest today in the studio is Dr. Gordie Jones. Welcome, Gordie.
Hey, Andrew, thank you. Thank you guys for inviting me, and I look forward to chatting with you.
Great, and we're gonna dig into that here in just a bit. And so I want to welcome back all of our past listeners. We appreciate you coming back again and again, and just really learning about sustainability from Agri-Services and Engineering's perspective. And welcome to our new visitors. And so what we want to do here is really talk about sustainability as it relates to animal agriculture. And so what does sustainability mean to us? And if we're doing a good job, our episodes kind of weave through all these. And I know this episode sure will. So we really think about sustainability in three ways. One is maybe the most obvious, and that is protecting the air and the water. That is keeping the air that we breathe clean and the water that we drink clean as well, and keeping any contaminants out of the air and the water. So that's pretty kind of like the basic thing that people think of as sustainability. Other part of sustainability is resource efficiency, and that is doing more with less. And this is something that Gordie is going to really have a lot to speak about, because the dairy industry has come a long way. And the last thing is business sustainability. We have to have businesses that are viable and strong, that continue to stay in business and continue to feed us and clothe us and do all the awesome things that agriculture does. So again, this episode will weave in and all that. And again, I want to welcome Dr. Gordie Jones to the episode. And I'm just going to tell you just a little bit about Gordie Jones. And this is going to be the super high level. And first of all, I consider Gordie a mentor, actually. And not only a mentor, but we have a common mentor. Isn't that right, Gordie and Dr. Bill Bickert? Dr. Bill Bickert changed the way I looked at dairies and cows. Yep. Absolutely. And we're definitely going to dig into that. But Gordie has quite a career here in the dairy industry, and Gordie is a vet as in a veteran, and a veterinarian, and a father, and a dairyman, and he's kind of run the gamut when it comes to the dairy industry. And of all the people in the dairy industry, he's done as much as anybody has to make the dairy industry stronger. And so, Gordie, talking about how the dairy industry has come a long way. About 15 years ago, we were doing something together on a project, and you told a story about Gordie Jones, the young veterinarian coming out of vet school, and having been to a milking equipment course. And tell us about your first assignment after that.
Yeah, I was probably in practice in my second year, maybe third year, and the practice had sent me to a 3-day milking machine course taught by one of the industry milking machine equipment companies. And I came back full of all kinds of engineering and pressure and vacuums and understanding what we thought were causes of mastitis. And I worked for two veterinarians, and one of them, Dr. Darrell Johnson, suggested that I head to the Bergner brothers, that they were milking in a tie stall barn, and they were about to be shut off from the milk plant. Their plate counts had gotten too high, and they needed work. And Darrell, with a sly smile, looked at me and said, "Gordie, you've just taken the milking machine class. You should go down there and see if you can help these boys." And they were the Bergner brothers in Poughkeepsie, who are long gone. Well, the Bergner brothers, I got down there, and I had milking machine testing equipment. I had vacuum gauges. I had a Deco recorder to do pulsations on the vacuum, on the claws. And I asked the boys, I said, "Can I see your milking machine?" And the two boys showed me their hands. And I looked at them in stunned silence and I went, what? It turned out they were milking 10 cows each. They had a 20 cow herd, and each of them was milking by hand. So if you want to go where I started, these were not Amish dairymen. They were just Class B milk producers, were making cheese milk, and they were milking by hand using a common dirty rag. And it was the only herd in my whole veterinary career of about 48 years where I diagnosed strep ag. It was an obligate parasite of the udder, so that meant it was being transferred by this rag from cow to cow to cow. We instituted clean paper towels for them. We instituted clean water and dry cow therapy and got them back on selling milk again. And we've gone from there to the space shuttle, I want to say. We've gone from there to designing herds. Right now I'm part of a 3-person project designing probably the largest herd in the world. It'll be in Algeria, about 140,000, 160,000 milk cows. So we go from milking 10 cows by hand to that.
So if you can, Gordie, what does that milking system consist of? I mean, obviously big rotary parlors, but how many cows per hour would a facility like that be milking?
Well, they're going to be 100 cow rotaries. They'll milk 5,000 cows per stall per dairy unit, and then they'll each I think there's 10 times 5,000, so between 40 and 50,000 per site, and then there's going to be 4 sites. So let's do 40,000 per site times 4 sites, and that'll be 160,000 milk cows. Algeria has decided they get 70% of their food from outside, and they want to increase food security. And so they're in a joint project with Baladna.
Of course.
And Baladna Dairy from Qatar and the Algerian government are putting this project together.
Yep. That's incredible. So so from milking cows by hand 50 years ago to 100 stall rotaries. So we've come a long way for sure.
Come a long way.
And so, we talked about our common mentor, Dr. Bill Bickert. So that you were still presumably pretty earlier in your career. There was something that prompted you to contact Bill, and just kind of talk about that if you would, because it's really a catapult. Because I've always, and you tell me if I'm wrong, Gordie, but I always think of Bill as kind of like the father of the cow comfort movement, but you are the person who made it really grow legs and really made it. It weaves into every dairyman's vernacular.
It does. I would say I was in my 6th or 7th year of practice. It was 1983. The ag engineers had a conference, a dairy housing conference in Madison, Wisconsin. And I have beyond my veterinary degree, I have a dairy degree at Michigan State. So I was exposed in the 70s to Bill, just through one class or a part of a dairy management or a dairy production class. So I had met Bill. But in 83, I went to the dairy housing conference and met both Jack Albright and reconnected with Bill Bickert. Bill was presenting stuff and Jack was presenting things. And they hit a note in me that really took off. And so by 1986, because of the inspiration of Bill and recontact with him, I wrote a paper for American Association of Bovine Practitioners, the AABP. In 86, I wrote a paper, and I hardly write anything, but I wrote a paper on the veterinarian's opportunity to improve cow comfort, so to make the environment better for cows. And that was really the first use of cow comfort in anybody's literature. So a few years ago, I was one of the fathers of cow comfort, if you will, taking from Bill Bickert's stuff. And one of the proudest moments I have is that Bill, every one of his ag engineering students, his grad students who were interested in dairy, had to come through my practice. So a couple of you, including you, had to come through my practice because I was the N of one, if you will, for a lot of Bill Bickert's ideas: sand bedding, open sidewalls, natural ventilation, and those improvements in the cow's environment.
Yes. And so talk about how how cow comfort progressed, like the Bergner brothers, they had a certain environment, that stanchion barn. What was can you go through the incremental changes from then to where we are now?
Well, probably in the late 80s and early 90s, I was starting. I was probably the father of a movement to stop big herds. I was going to protect my little guys, and in fact, one of the true ironies of my life is that I moved to Wisconsin because I hated the Michigan freestalls in the late 70s, early 80s. The freestalls in Michigan in the mid 70s looked like you had taken a cow and you had dipped her in manure and you were going to deep fry her. You couldn't get more manure on a cow with a trowel. They were dirty places. So I was going to be a vet who was going to fix broken cows, sick cows, and help dairymen. And I started to realize that what I realized early was that my best day was a dairyman's worst day. And that cows had problems because of either bad environment, bad air, bad stalls, dirty cows, or whatever. And so the irony was I went to Wisconsin to work in tie stall barns and became an expert in freestalls. As my dairymen had to expand, I took some of Bill Bickert's stuff, the stuff you were doing with sand-laden manure, and started sand, open sidewalls. And every time we did something, every time we increased air to cows or laid them down better, they gave more milk. And so we weren't breeding them better. We weren't necessarily feeding them better yet in the early days, but we gave them more air and more comfort, and suddenly dairymen were getting more milk. And then probably in 88 to 90, the single TMRs to small herds came into play. And I went back to my roots in dairy science beyond veterinary medicine and became a nutritionist and started to feed herds with a single TMR. And away they went. We now had healthy rumens. We gave cows fresh air and a great bed. And then science caught up to us. I mean, we now know that every extra hour in bed will get us 3.5 to 5 pounds more milk to a cow who has a full rumen. And so it's just been an evolution since then. And then Alex Bach was a veterinarian who got his veterinarian from Spain who got his PhD in nutrition at Minnesota. Alex spent 6 weeks with me when I was feeding 30 to 50 herds and small herds in Wisconsin. And he saw me feed one herd of 800 cows. And I had 3 neighbors there who would not buy a TMR mixer, but I convinced the 800 cow dairy and the 3 herds to put their corn silage, their haylage into the 800 cow herds pile. They would mix the TMR and then deliver it to these 3 other herds. And suddenly these 3 other herds who had better cow comfort, more fresh air, were getting way more milk than my 800 cow herd on the exact same ration. Well, Alex Bach took that back to Spain, and Alex did a true study where he took 47 herds in Spain, fed them, all convinced them to feed their rations together, build their feed together, and showed that milk production, 56% of milk production was not the ration. It was management. When you feed them, how they lay down, age at first calving, cow comfort, fresh air. And so Alex gave a wonderful foundation paper that we've been able to take past that.
That's excellent. So just go through that. Then you mentioned the importance of lying time. Can you just go through the timeline of a lactating cow's day as far as how much time she should be doing what, and then this, that, and the other thing, ideally?
Yeah. So as I started to get into bigger herds, and in fact, I'm going to back up, somewhere in the mid-90s, California took over from Wisconsin as America's dairyland. And it broke Wisconsin's heart. And I was a Wisconsin veterinarian and working for Wisconsin dairymen. Terry Howard was a nutritionist at the University of Wisconsin. And he took the DHIA records, if you will, and was trying to save the ego, if you will, of the dairy industry in Wisconsin. And he looked up the top 10 herds in the state. And he gave me a call and he said, Gordie, of the top 5 herds in the state, you've got 4 of them. What are you doing? And I said, Terry, it's all cow comfort and fresh air and a single TMR. And he goes, it's got to be more than that. And I said, it wasn't. And then I asked him, I had 4 of the top 5. I said, who's the 5th one? And Terry said, well, you wouldn't know him. He's bottom of the state. And I went, oh, that was Joe Brandt, Cuba City. He went, yeah. And I went, I've got him too. So I got a reputation for high production based on basically cow comfort. And from there, I was starting to work on larger and larger dairy herds. And as I got to larger dairy herds, it comes to you. There's 3 circles in the dairy industry. And as in a 100 cow herd, it's easy for me to find the fresh cows, the high cows, the low cows, the dry cows. Well, as you start to get into larger and larger herds, I look at 3 circles in a cow's life. And the first circle is, what is 24 hours in her day? How does she spend a day? How many times a day do you milk the cow? How much time does it take you to move her to the parlor, at the parlor, come back from the parlor? When is feed delivered? How many times do you deliver feed? How much time has she got to eat, drink, and sleep? And the take-home message for everyone is that cows need more than 20 hours, about 20 hours and 30 minutes of uninterrupted time to eat, drink, sleep, and interact with other cows. So you're allowed to move my cows, as I say, to the parlor and back no more than 3.5 hours in their day. And then one of the take-homes for dairy producers listening to this, it'll stop me from having to troubleshoot so many herds, is cows are crepuscular. And what's crepuscular? Crepuscular is dawn dusk, low light. Cows were, if I take my cows were slow-moving prey species. And by that, not a horse, they can't outrun their predators. And as they were developing, their 2 main predators were the large cats, and they were also man. And so now cats hunted at night, man hunted at the day, and the cow went, well, where do I fit into this? I've got cats hunting me at the nighttime and man at the daytime. So she became crepuscular, and she goes out at dawn, eats as much as she can, fills her rumen up, and then boogies back to safety. And cows will eat about 35% of their total intake at first meal in the morning. And so dairy herds who feed, it isn't the average cow, it's the high-producing cows. We want the high-producing cows that's going to eat 35% of her total intake to not leave a semicircle at the bunk. If she's left a semicircle at the headlock, you've underfed that cow, particularly your best cow. So if you're looking at a herd that's got an 80-pound herd average, I'd like to see some 160-pound cows. If you've got a 90-pound herd average, I want to see 180-pound cows. And if you don't have a few of those in your herd, those are the ones not getting enough feed in the morning. And so one of the take-home messages is feed more feed in the morning. And then that whole day, how much do we disturb cows? How do we take care of them? Do we let them lay down? If we make the bed so they can get into bed, every extra hour out of the New Miner Institute in New York shows us 3.7 pounds to 4 pounds more milk for every extra hour in bed. So making the beds, that's where Bill Bickert led the charge on lunge space, and then neck rail placements, and then and sand bedding. And sand bedding, we've got data now out of the UW Wisconsin and Pam Ruge's research that sand bedding will get us another 3 liters, almost 6 pounds more milk if we use sand bedding. Anyway, deep bedding. So between solids and deep bedding, cows who lay down more give more milk if they've got a full rumen.
Yeah.
And then the next circle is, what does a cow do for a year? How does she travel around the herd? So if we're looking for management points to intercept a herd and looking at it, I want to know, when does she freshen? What you do for fresh cows? What you do for breeding? Your voluntary waiting period? Do you change rations? How does a cow travel around? 60 days dry. And then the third circle is the baby circle, and it's a 2-year circle. So we have a 1-day circle, we have a year circle, and we have a 2-year circle. And those are the management circles that help dairymen achieve excellence.
But back to the lactating cow circle. So of that, what would be a practical amount of lying time? Because of the fact you do want them eating, of course, you do want them socializing. What is a practical maximum time you could expect or want?
Well, herds are seeing somewhere between 12 to 14 hours of laying time, and the herds that achieve a little more than that get more milk. So we want to see at least 12 hours of laying time, and the great herds are doing 14 to 16 hours in bed.
14 to 16. That's remarkable. And you mentioned bedding, and of course that's one of the things that brought you and I together way back when. And you mentioned the sand versus solids. There's a lot more dairies now are using solids. Remarkably, the biology hasn't changed from when solids, the first coming, so to speak, of solids. What has changed today that has made solids more amenable as compared to sand? And would you agree that would you still say sand is the gold standard?
First of all, I would say sand's the gold standard. Secondly, I would say sand is wonderful for cows, and there isn't anything else on the dairy that likes sand. There's nothing else on the dairy that likes sand except for the cow. No machinery, no dairymen. Sand is an aggravation to everybody but the cow, and it's worth the aggravation. One of the things leading people to solids is that sand-laden manure doesn't make as much methane as solids-laden manure. So solid-laden bedding, so if you have a herd that's using solids for bedding, they end up getting, if they have a downstream digester, a methane-producing digester, whether it's a lagoon or a digester or whatever, when you use solids for bedding, you end up with an increased amount of methane out of the manure, and that had value. That value with the current administration is dropping a little. The contracts aren't as sweet. Global warming isn't as big a topic as it was with the last administration. And so a lot of the new contracts aren't quite as lucrative. And I'm down here in Florida now, and I do know everybody's still capturing methane from their manure, but none of the herds down here are bedding with solids. Across the Midwest, solids have gained, a foothold because of gas production. And they take a lot more management. You have to fluff and dry the beds a lot more. You have to make sure the footing's better. All of those things happen with solids.
Yeah.
But deep bedding of any sort still puts a cow into her bed.
Yep. Yes, and I would add to that, just from my experience with both sand and solids, to me there's two keys. If it's deep and if it's dry, you are setting yourself up for success. Deep and dry. You can have deep and wet. Deep and wet is bad. Deep and dry is good.
Yeah, there's a brand new paper. Paul Revnicki, the wellness doctor from Grande Cheese, shared with me from the people at Guelph. And the fifth reason the beds don't work so well is soiled beds. So as we increase the score of dirty beds, they lose up to 2 hours of time in bed because of wetness, dirtiness, and dirty beds. So keeping a clean bed will increase your time in bed.
Indeed. And keeping a clean bed involves a couple different things. One, of course, is the resting surface. The other is something you and I used to talk about a lot, and that is stall dimensions, because there were some dimensions that were being used at one point that got cows laying sideways and too far forward and whatnot. I think we've overcome that, have we not?
Yeah, we will. Next week, I'm speaking at the National Mastitis Council, and I'm speaking on better beds for cleaner cows, and I'll present something that I don't think the industry's talked about. We worked hard on lunge space, if you will, so that a cow can lunge forward, lunge and bob, and get up. Well, we put her against walls, and the Michigan State Loop allowed her to go sideways to get up, and that was one of the first acknowledgments that cows need a space to do the acrobatic trick, if you will, to get up. Well, now that we have, I'll get another cow. Now I got cows all over my desk. Now that we have two cows facing each other, we have lunge space forward. Well, we don't need to offer side lunge. And in fact, as beds got wider and wider, cows are starting to lay diagonally again. Well, I'm trying to stop that. And I'm now I'm suggesting that we don't offer loops that offer side lunge, because a side lunge, cows don't side lunge, cows will lay diagonal and then dirty their stalls.
Right.
So my talk at NMC next week is building better better beds for cleaner cows, or don't let somebody throw you for a loop. And
Oh,
and so we've got some bad loops out there right now that are allowing cows to both lay straight in bed and diagonally. And so I'm presenting stuff to let's stop that, to make cleaner cows. So getting them in bed gets us more milk. Laying them straight and clean gets us lower cell counts and gets us milk over a year, because we lower our mastitis, we lower our somatic cell count, and we get cleaner milk and more production.
yeah. So, you've the number of dairymen that you've been in contact with or worked with and helped make better all around the world, it's a huge number. And so you kind of know the way a dairyman thinks because you are a dairyman, and I'm going to talk about that in a bit. But, of all the things that you talk about, what is the thing that dairymen are most likely to not adopt that are the easy things to do to get that extra pound or 2 or 3? What are they incredulous to adopt? Or is there anything that fits that bill?
Let me see. Well, first of all, we have this fight between average intake and our best cow's intake. So I want more feed, at least 60% of the food delivered in the morning. And some of them, because of mixer sizes and equipment sizes, can't deliver that amount of feed in the morning. And so by feeding more in the morning, I get cows to eat more. I've always said there's 2 genes in the dairy industry, and the 2 genes are the don't pay taxes gene. So we find some way to don't pay taxes, and the lean-to gene. And the lean-to is we add to a facility. If we have a facility, we add it. And getting cows back to bed, getting cows in poor facilities. The new facilities are fabulous. Most of the designers, like your group and others, are making wonderful dairies. The bottlenecks I see are in old dairies where I can't get to bed and can't get to food. I've got small crossovers, and those take a change in physical facilities. Feeding timing takes a change, and then the simple stuff, making sure the beds are clean and making sure the cows can get into bed and they can lunge and they can the neck rail's in the right position to get them in, and that there's enough cushion.
So when you talk about the lean-tos, it reminds me of one time you said that you were a member of the Red Barn Club or something like that in Wisconsin, where it was just, Grandpa's got a chicken coop, so we should stick some free stalls in there, and we can't knock that down because that's sacred ground,
Yep, exactly. And so it was a lean-to on a lean-to on a lean-to. And I was in a dairy in Pennsylvania where I first used the term on a father and 2 sons. I was trying to understand how cows traveled both to the parlor and how they traveled around the dairy. And it was a lean-to on a lean-to on a lean-to. And I was having trouble orienting how the thing worked out. And I said, this is a moron dairy. And they took umbrage. Everybody's mad and looking at me going, are we morons? And I said, no, you've added more on more on more on more. And so my definition of some of these dairies, we built bottlenecks into them of getting cows to feed, to bed, and then bottlenecks in the pens where cows are.
Yeah. So after your time in private practice, you went on and you were in charge of technical services at Monsanto, which I always viewed you and your team as like the Delta Force of dairy specialists, because the things that group did really was talk about changing the world, or at least changing the way people dairied in the United States. Pretty incredible.
I wasn't in charge of that group. I was a tech service veterinarian that covered the west half of the country. Wayne Weiland was in charge of tech service. And we really put together an amazing extension team.
Yep.
I've never heard anybody refer to us as a Delta team, but we were there. And my job in Monsanto was any large expansion, any large herd that was having troubleshooting or didn't believe BST worked, I would go out there and find the problem in management, in nutrition, in housing, in cow comfort, and solve that problem. I like to say that Monsanto made more milk fixing dairy herds than we did selling BST. And
Yeah.
and in that role, we got to me and others got to design the first large dairy in the in the Midwest at Fair Oaks.
Yep.
And then I became part of their team.
Yep, absolutely. Yeah, I always looked at that what you guys did. Forgive me for making the analogy, but I think it's right, that very similar to the harvester silos. And what I mean by that is, yeah, harvester silos may have made better feed, but the harvester silo salesman was there when you picked your corn seed, when you plowed, when you disked, when you cultivated, when you sprayed, when you when you harvested,
if you cut image, yep,
absolutely. And you put it up in the silo, and it came out, and it was wonderful. But was it wonderful because of the harvester, or was it because you had maybe the delta force of crop production, helping you with the production chain? But anyway, I think BST aside, the whole idea, I think, is that what you guys did was you guys tackled it all. It wasn't just BST; it was the entire, everything on the dairy had to be right.
Oh man, the team that Monsanto put together was an incredible cadre of professionals, nutritionists and veterinarians together that made a lot more milk than BST did by their advice and their consulting. Absolutely.
Yep. So after Monsanto, then you transitioned to I shouldn't say transitioned. You became a partner in a dairy farm, and Central Saints Dairy. And
I went to Fair Oaks for 6 years with Mike McCloskey and Tim Dundalk, and then I partnered with them, and we built a dairy in central Wisconsin, Central Saints Dairy. And for about 6 years there, I managed that dairy. So I was the managing partner.
Go ahead, Gordie.
Go ahead.
I was going to say, my question for you is, in those 6 years, so now you're on the other side. You are the dairyman. What was the biggest surprise to you? Consultant Gordie, veterinarian Gordie. Now I'm dairyman Gordie. What was like? Wow, I didn't expect things this way.
Probably the biggest surprise was the number of vendors I had to meet all the time. And you'll love this as an ag engineer, and I've certainly helped people build buildings. I almost had to call every person who built a building and apologize. I thought I've helped lots of people make dairies that were good for cows. And when I built my dairy, I was amazed how many decisions had to be made every day that was going to affect how a gate opened, how this did, how the slope of this concrete that wasn't in the plans. And they were crucial to making the dairy work well. So I was calling people going, if things are working well on your dairy, it wasn't because of me, it was because of you. And so that was a big surprise. And then the amount of vendors who want to sell me something. And I have two rules when they visited me. And the first rule was I didn't care what they know until I know that they cared. I didn't care what they knew until I knew that they cared. So they had to have passion for our industry. They had to have some love for it and not just selling me something. And then they had to have ownership of the solution, if you will, the people who were bringing me something. I think I had one of my greatest days on the dairy in an area that I was not an expert in, obviously, was parasite control, fly control. And one of the vendors brought an entomologist to my dairy, and we walked the dairy for 2 hours where I started to understand the life cycle of a fly. I hadn't cared much about the life cycle of a fly. And he taught me how to kill more flies with a shovel, how to take away their breeding habitat than it did with spraying any insecticides, right? And so the visit was incredible. And then the salesman offered me 3 solutions for my flies, if you will, the cheap solution, the middle solution, and the Cadillac, the best solution. And I was really mad because I went, wait a minute. I said, it's now my choice. I've only had 2 hours of training. I've got an entomologist here and a vendor. I said, you guys have walked my dairy. If I choose and it doesn't work, you get to the famous Indiana Jones quote was when they have the chalice, he chose poorly. So that comes to my mind. If I choose the cheap way and it doesn't work, you guys smile and go, you chose poorly. Instead, I said, you've looked at my dairy, you see what we're doing, which solution fits me. So I want vendors who come to me. When I go to a dairy, I believe in my solutions and own them, if you will. I don't tell them to put a neck rail at 48 to 50 inches because you can't put it at 48 to 50. You have to put it at one of those. And they don't get to choose. I get to choose. And so I learned that the vendors had to own the solutions they brought to me, and then how we would measure, what would success look like and how would we measure it. So those were the biggest changes of dairying. And I always knew, because as I switched to preventing problems, it was people who caused problems. When a cow has a problem, if a cow gets sick, if a cow has a problem, it has a first and last name, and it's not E. coli causing mastitis, it's a human. And I'm going to give you the example of a young lady veterinarian that worked for me and was fabulous. She was just incredible. And she came back to our dairy, back to our vet practice, and she had pieces of dead baby calves, baby calves, and she had lungs and liver and kidneys, and she had all these organs, and she had fresh manure. And I said, what are you doing? And she said, I'm going to find out what's killing Bill Williams' calves. And I said, what? And this was going to take a couple $100 in lab work and investigative stuff. And I said, no, you're not. I said, I'll tell you what's killing Bill Williams' calves. It's Bill Williams. And I said, and what you're going to find is the murder weapon. You're going to find what Bill's using to kill them. And you don't need to know the murder weapon. If we go back to management, if we keep the calves clean, dry, if we give them fresh air, if we protect them from cold, if we do the right things for calves, it doesn't matter if it's E. coli, salmonella, it doesn't matter if it's rotavirus, corona, we'll do a great job. So we really don't need as much lab work as we need people work. And so managing my dairy became a real exercise in building teams that took care of my cows. And then the one thing we probably changed the most at Fair Oaks and my dairy was the role of the person who brought the cows to the parlor. That person, we all call him the cow pusher, the cow drover, the person. He's the one person on my dairy that saw every cow every day. Mm-hmm. And it wasn't his job just to move cows. It was to find the lame cows. It was to find the sick cows. It was to find the cows that aren't doing right and identify them. And if I had a sharp pusher, he became my herd managers. Mm. And so we use that as a better position. And we elevated that position because he was the one seeing all my cows every day. The only person on my dairy that saw them all day long.
Yeah, that's interesting. So it's not like an entry-level position, the cow pusher, then, is what you're saying.
It's generally an entry level, but it shouldn't be. It's a person who needs to identify cows in heat, and needs to identify cows who are lame, identify cows who something isn't doing right. Yeah. And so they were part of the team. Yeah. And so managing a dairy was really, I had a ball. I tell people this story. I built the dairy. I was there as it was constructed. And for the first 700 days, I didn't take a day off. And that was the most fun I've had on a dairy farm. It was almost 2 years, and it was training the teams and getting the teams to do their jobs and helping them understand each of their roles, whether they were in maternity or the herdsmen or breeders and the people who took care of my cows. And so it was a ball. And luckily, I have a wife who stays up very, very late, sleeps in, and so I could be with the team at 5 a.m, quit at noon to spend a day with my wife, and she goes, "Oh, you've had the day off," and I just spent 7 hours, so it worked out well. Yep. And we went from there.
Yeah. Well, by the way, I've met her, and she's a dandy.
Yeah, she's a keeper.
So Gordie,
at least I've been lucky she's kept me.
So you've covered a lot of ground in your career, from being, again, a veteran. Thank you for your service, by the way, and to a veterinarian in private practice, to technical services, to being a dairyman, and you've seen a lot. So where do you see it going from here, Gordie? I mean, 50 years ago to when you were diagnosing, milk quality issues, when the guys are milking by hand, 50 years is going to be here in a snap. Where's our industry going in terms of technology and production? And
well, Paul Fricke at University of Wisconsin probably said it best. So I'll quote Paul, and the dairy industry can best be described in the last 25 years as change. We're just getting bigger and bigger and bigger dairies, and yet we milk one cow at a time as she steps on our rotaries, whether she steps into a box robot. We still take care of one cow at a time, but we take care of a lot more cows. I would say that the average dairyman will expand 4 times in their dairying lifetime. So when they had 25 and 50 and 100 and 200 cows, and then it became 200, 800, 1,600, and 3,200. And now it's multiples of somewhere between 3,000 and 5,000 cows are the unit, and then multiples from there. So the 120 cow rotaries are milking 700 plus cows an hour. I just met a dairyman who is building 3 rotaries together, Andrew. The holding area will milk all 3, deliver 3 large 100 plus rotaries, and the cow pen will be 2,000 cows. And and yet every cow will have a bed, every cow will get a balanced ration, every cow will be milked one at a time as she enters those parlors. And so the dairy industry is continuing to get bigger, and we can't stop it. All we can do is make sure that we all take care of cows, that we give them. Dr. Trevor DeVries at Guelph said it best. I wish I had done it, or Bill Bickert had quoted it, but we've underestimated the value of fresh air on dry matter intake. And we went from wind tunnels to cross vents because our wind tunnels got too long. Your office mate, Rick Stowell, proved to us that somewhere past 600 feet, the air in a wind tunnel or cross vent, somewhere past 600, the air gets saturated, dirty, and can't hold any more pollution. So we can't make these long 1,000, 1,200 foot wind tunnels anymore, and we're making cross vents. And then if you look me up under Artex and hybrid ventilation, you'll see a positive ventilation dairy I designed, where in a 4-row barn, we're bringing air in from the side positively. And then below 20 degrees Celsius, below 70 degrees Fahrenheit, we're naturally ventilating it. So when the air is not hot, we're naturally ventilated, and when the cows are under heat stress, we're closing it up, giving them fresh air and soaking them. So it's been a fun ride. I still have energy and still love getting out and helping people find lost milk.
Yeah. Well, as I said, you are amongst the best when it comes to the people who've positively affected our industry, and the people in town, so to speak, who consume our products. They would be amazed to know just the extent that people like you and Bill Bickert and whatnot have done to increase production, improve milk quality, improve the life of a cow, so to speak, in barns. And I think I thank you for everything that you've done, because it's been.
Well, I'm grateful for having Bill mentor me in facilities.
Yeah,
and Jack Albright in bovine behavior.
Yep. And so, that's great, and you've had a fantastic impact on my career, because as you mentioned earlier on, Bill Bickert graduate students all spent time with Gordie Jones, because remarkably, just as there are veterinarians are connected to ag engineers are connected to veterinarians, and so back in those days, Gordie, a Bill Bickert graduate student, it wasn't a degree mill, so to speak, in that you got your degree, but you also put your time in to become a well-rounded ag professional.
Yeah, I had one of the ag engineers ask why a veterinarian was interested in his building, and I said I had nothing to do with concrete. I can't even come up with something. The power of the concrete, or the ability of it to withstand the pounds per square inch or whatever, or the wind load or the snow load on a building or whatever. But I said, once you put a cow in it, you need somebody so you understand bovine behavior, and so she can express herself as well as she could. And so that ag engineer decided I was okay. And
Well,
but
great.
there was a while, what was I sticking my nose in there for?
Yeah. Well,
So,
super glad that you did. And Gordie, it's always a pleasure.
hey, I thank you for this time together. It's great to see you and your successes.
Yep.
You removed sand from our manure. You've helped cows get great beds. You've done a great job as an ag engineer.
Well,
So thank you.
Well, thank you very much. And so looking forward to working with you again in the future. And to our listeners, thank you for joining the herd today.